Have Ukrainian forces cut off Russians trying to hold the border regions in Kursk? And is this a shift not just in the tactical environment, but a huge strategic shift as well? I'm Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran. Let's talk about it. Okay, so this is a story covering the Sym River in Kursk Oblast, and Ukraine has been on an interesting campaign taking out at least one of the 3 bridges in the Sym region. And this is really interesting because as War Mapper here points out, let's see if we can get the big version here. As you can see, Russian forces south of this river essentially require one of these bridges to be operative in order to not just conduct a resupply operations, right, to get munitions and such to their forces sitting on the border, but also to withdraw or reposition forces. And so if the other 2 bridges are taken out, then what you would end up with is actually a very troubling situation for these Russian forces, effectively not quite cutting them off, right? But they would have to be resupplied via things like boats and ferries, potentially pontoon bridges, but that seems also unlikely to occur. And so what you have is a situation in which these forces may be functionally cut off unless Russia can somehow conduct a pretty game-changing level of assault from the west. But again, Ukraine is currently occupying that territory. So it would be a really potentially bad situation. And we've seen, for example, some news reports are indicating that this was actually done as a HIMARS strike, which would reflect a substantial change in the current policy around strikes. You might recall that the last time the U.S. publicly acknowledged its policy for use of its own weapons, it said that they had to be immediately defensive, so to break up a pending Russian attack. And while it's possible that these bridges may have been an avenue of approach for example, a Russian attack or Russian reinforcements for an attack, this also looks more like the kind of deep strike infrastructure targeting that you would see as part of an offensive operation or as part of the preparations for an offensive, right? Again, if Ukraine's plan was to apply additional pressure along this border region, which is something that we've kind of seen rumors of it happening, this is the exact kind of preparatory operation you would see. Deep strike, things like HIMARS, and also, there was also video that I can't really show you guys of purportedly a Ukrainian sabotage team taking out another bridge, potentially up in this region. But this is a sign, again, I think that Ukrainian offensive plans are still quite substantial, right? And they haven't dialed it back. And even Syrsk commander, Ukrainian army head Syrsky, said Friday that Kiev's forces were advancing 1 to 2 miles in some areas, which is, again, not anything like the previous offensive pace, but is still very, very substantial by the standards of this war. Again, as we've pointed out in earlier videos, for this offensive in Kursk has done in the span of about 2 weeks what the Russians have required around 2 to 3 months to achieve in terms of gains. So again, is this a major, major tectonic shift? Is this a stunning armored breakthrough? No, not now, not anymore. But what it is a very humiliating situation for Russia, and Ukraine's ability to continue to make these advances is actually seems quite effective. They seem quite able to continue to make these gains. Their pace seems to be very, very deliberate. There hasn't been a ton of evidence that they've taken like unsustainable casualties the way they did in the early days of the counteroffensive. And of course, it forces Russia to make really hard political decisions about things like the use of their conscripts or continuing to have offensive operations in the Donetsk region. Now, before we talk about exactly where Ukraine is making these gains and where Russia is trying to continue to push, if you feel like you need to lock in and get some gains, especially here in back to school season, man. It's hard. You may need some strike gum. Now, don't give strike gum to your kids, all right? I'm not one of those Paul brothers. I'm not going to sell your kids caffeine. This is for adults. Why? Because I took an entire energy drink and put it into one of these pieces of strike gum. Each piece, and there's 5 in this thing, contain 90 milligrams of caffeine, 100 milligrams of alpha GPC, no sugar, but refreshing mint flavor. So if you need the energy to get your kids out the door, just to brave the complete chaos of traffic as every Karen tries to drop off their kids at school because nobody rides a bus anymore, pick up some strike gum. And we got a sale for you because listen, I'm here to look out for you guys. If you want, you get 2 or more of the 5 packs, and we'll give you free shipping. It's a pretty good deal. That literally makes it, after shipping, it is cheaper to buy 3 5-packs than it is to buy a 15-pack tray. You may be like, Paul, that sale doesn't make any sense. Why would you offer that? And essentially, it has to do with our old fulfillment provider. They're being jerks, but their greed is your benefit, because I just want to sell a lot of these 5-packs because they won't ship them back to us. So check it out. The promo code is, of course, Strike BTS, Strike Back to School. Get it, right? Link is in the description. So definitely, if you've been thinking about it, man, now is the time. Okay, let's talk about the gains that we've seen. First off, this is Deep State. And so Deep State is always a little on the conservative side, but you could see they're reporting a pretty sizable progress, right? Ukrainian forces going from Plakovo, confirmed control, to Borky, a distance of 5 kilometers. That's actually, and they're assessing it actually even further than that. They're assessing it at 7 kilometers, which for a 24-hour gain is pretty massive, again, by this war's standards. You can also see Ukrainian forces driving ever deeper, having seized yesterday Visnapone. But this gray area represents a large portion in which Ukrainian forces are currently contesting more and more of Russian turf. You can also see on the map here, right? You see how this Seim River is actually quite robust, and it's pretty wide. And so you can also see the terrain to the north of it is pretty inaccessible. All this says that this whole area could prove vulnerable to isolation, to cutting them off, right? And it wouldn't be hard, especially given how restrictive this terrain is, for Ukrainian forces to use their HIMARS to really cook these guys. And again, you can see that if they can cut off the Russians here, the Russians will be forced to have to try to somehow... they would have to break through this Ukrainian line. You can see here in Snagost, and I want to point out that Live UA is assessing that Ukrainians do hold control here. And I think this is interesting because what you may have is kind of the military version of an if-then statement, right? A conditions, like a decision tree, effectively. And the decision tree I suspect may look like this. Ukrainian forces seize Snagost. They get closer to the point where they actually control this key route. They control all the way up to the southern bank of the Seim. Right? And then what does that mean? That means that there's no approach from the east that the Ukrainians don't control. Then you cut off the 3 bridges here in the Seim, and then you start to apply pressure to Russian forces here. Notice here, Russian military bloggers are reporting 3 hours ago that the Russian army withdrew from the west bank of the Seim River near Tokino and has blown up the bridges. This is because, again, they may suspect that the Ukrainians are going to be pushing in here. And so they're maybe trying to actually preserve their own forces. They may be trying to withdraw their own forces to the northern bank of the Seim. This would, again, represent basically Russia yielding 100% more territory to the Ukrainians from Kursk. But the trade-off would be, if Russia does withdraw, it would actually be pretty tough. This would be a pretty tough defensive line, and Russia could man it much more sparsely because it's so hard to conduct crossing operations. Therefore, that would allow Russia to put more troops to focus on containing this breakthrough here in the Sudzha region, right? And to block Ukraine from getting into what I think is still probably one of their more substantive targets, the Kurchatov nuclear power plant. Or excuse me, the Kursk nuclear power plant in Kursk City. So it sounds like Russia's taking this threat pretty seriously. Anyway, guys, that is all I had. Actually, wait. One more thing. ISW says 2 bridges. As discussed, right? One of those bridges reportedly collapsed following the strike. Again, I sort of suspect that what we're seeing is either HIMARS, right? One apparently taken out by HIMARS. I'm not shocked that a second one taken out by Ukrainian special forces. Again, something I think that they may have even released some video of to confirm its destruction. Okay, that is all I had, guys. Be sure to hit subscribe. That helps tell the YouTube algorithm that I'm one of the legit creators putting out real information, not some Russian shill or propagandist. Also, huge thank you to our Colonel tier members, particularly Bill Collier, Robin Colburn, Gyrus Marning, Eugene Cuesta, Chris Gorsuch, Fran Zacharias, and AL90. Somebody helped correct my Cyrillic. And of course, all our Lieutenant tier members. Could not do this without you guys. You guys are the ones who make this whole thing possible. I appreciate you so much, and I will see you guys in the next one. Cheers.